The PlayStation 4 has been on the market for 7 years, and with its successor drawing near, it's only fitting for Sony's platform to go out in style, especially when it comes to console exclusives. The Last of Us Part 2 seemed to be that game, considering the positive reputation of its predecessor, primarily for its storytelling. Instead, the sequel has been controversial, such as the divisive reception, the accusations for false advertising, as well as the invalid copyright claims brought onto content creators, including those that didn't feature any material from the product. While this fiasco was going on, another PS4 exclusive came out a month later by Sucker Punch Productions. Considering the devs prolonged its release due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which is still ongoing, I have finally spent time with Ghost of Tsushima, and not only is it a fantastic game, but what a way for the system to go out on a high. You play as Jin Sakai, a samurai of Tsushima who with his comrades and his uncle, Lord Shimura, attempt to repel the Mongol invasion. Their effort, however, ends catastrophically, as the Mongols slay the samurai, Lord Shimura becomes captive, and Jin is mortally wounded and close to death. Fortunately, local thief Yuna rescues and restores Jin to peak condition, informs him half the island is under their control, and Kota Khan holds Lord Shimura. In an attempt to rescue his uncle, Jin engages Khan at his stronghold, where he loses and is thrown off the bridge. Occupied, and realising conventional tactics are ineffective, the protagonist must gather allies, learn new skills, and reunite with Lord Shimura, so he can beat Khan and drive the Mongols from Tsushima. If you're familiar with Sucker Punch's previous work, you would know they were responsible for the infamous franchise, games that were open world. Ghost of Tsushima is no different, but whereas the infamous series had players controlling a protagonist with superpowers, their latest game is historically based, specifically on the first Mongol invasion of Japan. Of course, the devs took some liberties when creating their game, such as Jin Sakai being fictional, but what Sucker Punch have created is a title that will stand the test of time. In his pursuit for Tsushima's liberation, Jin must learn new techniques, and every objective he achieves gains him XP for skill points, so he can spend them on a variety of abilities. Also, gathering materials throughout the world allows him to improve weapons and armour, making them, and in turn, Jin more efficient in battle. The combat is brilliant, as positioning yourself and knowing when to parry for your opponent's demise never gets old. Furthermore, Ghost of Tsushima has 4 stances which Jin can utilise. Depending on the enemy type, he can switch between stances for not only different combos, but to break down their defences. It's possible to use a single stance, though your foes are just as lethal as the protagonist, so altering between them becomes necessary. However, once you get into a rhythm, seeing Jin make short work of Mongol soldiers is an exciting, violent spectacle. The direct approach doesn't stop there, there's also the optional standoff mode. Pressing up on the D-pad will put Jin into a duel with the nearest Mongol, and if you hold triangle and release it at the right time, he'll kill them in one hit. I emphasise right time, since your opponent can strike at any point, and later on they'll perform mock attacks to catch you out. It's a well thought out system, and even by the late game, my foes still caught me by surprise. By the way, you can upgrade this mechanic, so you can kill 3 Mongols in quick succession. Surprisingly, there's no lock-on system, so you might assume I would be critical because Jin can't focus on one enemy. However, this isn't the case due to Sucker Punch wanting to keep players in the middle of the fight, as well as the freedom to respond and improvise for multiple threats. Besides, all deaths that occurred were my fault. Ghost of Tsushima isn't all about combat. Jin can deploy stealth to tilt his odds. These range from stealth takedowns to utilising his bows at long range. Even secondary gadgets like smoke bombs and throwable kunai provide ways for dealing with threats. On a side note, they're also viable for direct scenarios. They only have a limited amount of ammunition, but like with Jin's armour and melee weapons, these too are upgradable. Not to mention, the charms you'll get along your journey augment Jin for different conditions. There are missions where Jin has to approach them in a certain way, but these weren't an issue because the gameplay is engaging. Whether you're clearing out campsites, encountering Mongols on the roads, or helping out one of your supporting characters. Even the boss fights are just as fun, and some of them provide rewards for Jin. Regardless of how you approach the enemy, Jin has a resolve meter for regaining health, although Lord Shimura says otherwise, as well as to unleash a special attack. At first, Jin only has 3 slots, but you can increase the capacity, and therefore utilise his skills governed around them more often. The controls are tight and intuitive, plus there are multiple settings in the options menu to fit your personal preference. Ghost of Tsushima looks beautiful, especially the particle, weather and wind effects running at once, and with Jin's horse, which you can choose along with a name, exploring the whole island was a pleasure. It does feature fast travel points, but these become active by discovering new locations. I also like how navigating in the open world has a sense of juxtaposition. By swiping up on the touchpad, not only does the wind guide Jin to his current mission, but it also complements the vibrant beauty of its locales. Combine this with a photo mode, which of course isn't new these days, it's one of those titles that beg you to take amazing shots. The voice acting is excellent, and it's intriguing to see Jin's transformation from abiding his samurai code to transforming into the ghost across its 3 acts. Jin wants to save his people, but he's deliberately going against his uncle's philosophy, as well as his training of facing the enemy head on. On a side note, Ghost of Tsushima does have Japanese voice acting, although I wouldn't recommend it for your first playthrough, unless you understand the language. Ghost of Tsushima can be played in Kurosawa mode, as it emulates the style of Akira Kurosawa's filmography, but due to how beautiful the game is, I would only recommend it for a second playthrough. Anyway, the narrative complements the upgrades you'll acquire along his journey, until eventually you'll be compelled defeating Mongols by non-samurai methods. Not everything about Ghost of Tsushima is worth the praise. The missions where Jin helps his allies are intriguing in isolation, but unless you finish them, it does downplay their involvement in the climax. I'm also not a fan of the dialogue system, as it doesn't have any repercussions for Jin and the people around him. There is a poignant moment in the end, though considering Ghost of Tsushima doesn't have a moral system, as well as how it automatically selects a dialogue option when the player doesn't intervene, it makes their inclusion meaningless. It's the same thing when Jin does any surveillance, due to having no consequence for how he approaches the enemy. Otherwise, Ghost of Tsushima is an outstanding samurai power fantasy, and is possibly Sucker Punch's best title to date. With a compelling story bolstered by engaging mechanics and beautiful visuals, I wouldn't be surprised to be on many best games lists of this year. I also want to point out it has recently got an update containing co-op multiplayer, New Game Plus and more, further adding additional content as well as replayability to such a well-made package. The PS5 may be on the horizon, but you do not want to miss this experience.